Welcome to our March 23rd event, Strategies for Struggles at Community Colleges and Beyond, Taking on the Tiers and Fighting the Cuts, co-sponsored by the Contingency Task Force of HELU, that's Higher Ed Labor United. My name is Joe Ramsey, and I will be facilitating our collectively organized event today. I am chair of HELU's Contingency Task Force, that's the CTF for short, and also a full-time non-tenure track faculty member, a senior lecturer, technically, at UMass Boston on a 4-4 teaching load, where I am an active member of the Faculty Staff Union in the Massachusetts Teachers Association. I want to thank everyone at HELU and in the Contingency Task Force for helping to make it today's event, and to all of you for attending on what I'm sure is a busy weekend for you. Public discourse in the United States about higher education tends to be dominated by stories of what's happening at elite colleges and universities, Harvard, UPenn, Columbia, etc. But most college students, as we know, do not attend these sorts of schools. Indeed, such quote-unquote elite schools define their very quality in large part by bragging about how many people they exclude. Far more college students attend public colleges and universities, and especially community colleges. Community college students, according to data from last year, make up fully 35% of all undergraduate students in the United States. That's 10.2 million students. And it is a very diverse and generally working class student population, reflecting the generally open enrollment nature of these public institutions. And yet the conditions, issues, and struggles of students, faculty, and other workers at community colleges are too often marginalized within our public discourse, and even sometimes, alas, within our own political or labor organizations. Related and compounding the problem is the fact that the vast majority of community college faculty are highly contingent workers, denied any path to tenure or even minimal job security, let alone academic freedom. Community colleges tend to be places where class sizes and course loads are huge, where pay is low, and where basic benefits and even due process rights are scarce and lacking for most. Thus, whereas over 70% of faculty in U.S. higher ed are now contingent, tenure-excluded faculty in one position or another, at community colleges, that figure is even higher, well over 80% at many institutions. And most of these contingent faculty at community colleges are on so-called part-time contracts, so-called adjunct faculty, increasing their precarity within the broader tent of contingency. This makes the struggles to defend and to improve and transform the working and learning conditions at community colleges a special concern for any broader project of combating labor contingency and fighting for educational solidarity and equality across our higher ed sector. Moreover, to give just one more glimpse of how central community colleges are, fully 50% of those students who eventually achieve a four-year degree have attended a community college on the way. That's 1/2 of all college students are affected by what happens on community college campuses. HELU's mission, Higher Ed Labor United's mission of building a higher ed workers movement that is truly wall-to-wall and coast-to-coast, thus needs to pay special attention to our community colleges. And so I'm glad we are sponsoring this event today. Certainly, our bosses and would-be rulers are paying close attention to this slice of the sector. Indeed, in preparing for this event today, this morning, I discovered that in a few days, with the arrival of April, we will be entering what has been officially designated as Community College Month by none other than the AACT, the Association of Community College Trustees. According to the ACCT, the theme for Community College Month, #CC Month, is to be, quote, cultivating skills for the future, end quote. And at the level of federal and state government, the Biden administration, as well as the state lawmakers in my home state of Massachusetts, have been making efforts to reduce the cost of attending community college, improving access for many students, a welcome development. And yet, reducing tuition and improving enrollments is only part of the battle. As our speakers today know full well, expanding student numbers without adequate staff and faculty funding can in fact intensify and further degrade the already difficult and even unsustainable teaching and learning conditions that community college faculty and workers and students face. Similarly, the trustees' slogan, cultivating skills for the future, raises critical questions for anyone, for us today, and anyone who truly cares about community college and community college students. Which skills are we talking about? And whose idea of the future? The question of which skills are to be cultivated and which cut loose from the millions of mostly working class students who attend community college is a deeply social and political question, as is the question of which type of future we and our students are to be asked to create, adapt to, imagine, or transform. Our panel of speakers today, I trust, will have their own set of skills and lessons to impart to us, perhaps different than the trustees have in mind, lessons about the strategies and insights they've developed on the front lines of struggle at community colleges across this continent, as well as one non-community college where adjuncts are leading the way. I look forward to learning from them and from all of you as we continue this Q&A, at this discussion with a Q&A after a panel of 5 speakers, and then breakout rooms that will allow you to pick your own theme. And we're hoping to be here for a couple of hours for some discussion. We will be saving the thoughts from the breakout rooms so that we can build our collective brilliance together. All right, that's enough from me. Now we're going to turn it over to the panel. I have 5 speakers to introduce to you. I'm going to do it briefly all at once and then get out of the way. Our first speaker today will be Linda Sneed. Linda, let me just find the bio here. You can say something, Linda, and say hello if you want, so people know who you are while I'm...
Everybody.
All right. Linda Sneed has taught English part-time in the California Community College System, the nation's largest public higher ed system, for over 20 years. For most of that time, she has been active in her local, statewide, and national unions to improve the compensation, working conditions, and professional treatment of contingent faculty. She is a tri-chair of the CFT's One Tier, One Faculty Task Force, dedicated to eliminating employment precarity and equalizing working conditions and compensation for all of California's community college faculty. And you know what, Linda, let's just start with you. We'll do intros one at a time, and we will move through here. We'll have Frank Costco, Diana Valera, Carol Lang, and Kalina Sisenker, but I'm actually assembling the bios as we speak. So Linda, take it away. You have 8 minutes, 8 to 10 minutes, and we are listening.
All right. Thank you so much, Joe. And it's really exciting to see you all. I think Joe mentioned that there were over 80 registrants, and it looks like we have over 40 folks in the room. The fact that we're recording this means that we're going to be able to disseminate the great work that's going to be done here. And I think we can all be very excited about that and seeing this as a kind of an inaugural event that may chart a path forward for the kinds of changes that we want to see. And indeed, I think that a sort of central message of what I'm going to be saying to you briefly, it really, in many ways, comes down to the importance of momentum and coalition building to achieve the kinds of changes that we need to see. So, as Joe mentioned, I'm out here in California, and I am part of what is often called not just the nation's, but the world's largest public education system, higher ed publication system. We were joking before we started about how exactly to characterize this system. It's a sort of non-system system. We have 72 community college districts, which throughout the state, which includes some are one college districts, some are multi-college districts. The largest of these is Los Angeles, with nine separate colleges. That's the largest of the districts in the state. And then I'm in the second largest up in Sacramento, the Los Rios district, which has 4 colleges. Of course, then you can imagine down from there are several one college districts. We have 115 or 116, depending on whether you count one of them colleges. We have a state chancellor's office, but the fact is that while we know how many students are enrolled throughout the system, which is nearly 2 million, how many faculty we have, no one could say definitively. Great question. Which those of you, which are all of you, I think, who understand the nature of contingency in higher ed may not be surprised by that when you think about it. No one's really keeping track. So I'd say that every one of our unions knows, give or take a few numbers around the edges, how many faculty there are in their bargaining units. But of course, we have local bargaining units, and then we have statewide affiliates. Well, in some cases. So we have two statewide unions, the California Federation of Teachers, or as we tend to call it, simply CFT, which represents community college faculty as a minority of its membership base, largely K-12. But actually, we represent the majority of community college faculty throughout the state. I'm affiliated with the CFT, and at the national level, AFT. And then we have CTA, another statewide union, which represents the majority of K-12 and a minority of community college faculty. They are significantly larger, are often called the big education union. Then we have independents without a state or national labor affiliation. So even in terms of using labor, we are a labor state, unlike some. Unions are every community college faculty member throughout the state is a member of a bargaining unit, if not an active dues-paying member of a union, and yet getting the unions really organized and in agreement, that can take a lot of heavy lifting. We also have some non-union professional, not non-union as in anti-union, but not unions. They are professional and advocacy organizations that play really important roles too. So in addition to the CFT and CTA statewide, we have an organization called FAC, which is the Faculty Association of California Community Colleges, very involved in legislative work, lobbying, and CPFA, the California Part-Time Faculty Association. And both of these have been in existence for decades. CPFA is the only one that is dedicated specifically to representing the interests of part-time faculty. So even getting the various kind of stakeholder groups of faculty and those who represent the interests of part-time faculty, the contingent faculty, the non-tenure track faculty within the community college world in California, is inherently a challenge. Other structural challenges we face, well, part-time faculty are defined as temporary employees in the California Education Code. So our efforts to chip away at and achieve some kind of equality with our full-time colleagues, namely something, if not called tenure, though that would be our ideal, something akin to tenure, is really knocks up against this wall called the temporary category. Full-time faculty and part-time faculty are not always on the same page ideologically. I've spoken about this before. It's something that continues to be, I'm sort of keenly aware of, is the ways that I think we are all aware as contingent faculty. And if you're an ally of contingent faculty, you're keenly aware of this as well, I imagine. The ways that our full-time faculty colleagues can, certainly not all, but can be very invested in being part of the upper tier, and not seeing part-time faculty, contingent faculty, as part of the faculty. So that can be a challenge. It can be a challenge, especially when full-time faculty are those who are at the helm of the organizations. So one more structural challenge that we see and that we're have strategies to address is a state legislature that seems to really have accepted the message. I was going to use a metaphor that I'm trying not to use anymore, about what we have, I think, come to call the completion agenda, the emphasis on those students who complete their time in community college, and the shift in thinking from community colleges back to the old nomenclature. Even if we're not calling them junior colleges, there are institutional prioritizations and means of funding, even ways of rhetorically framing what community college is that treats them as if they were junior colleges, as if the only students who really matter are those who are planning to transfer to a four-year institution and achieve a bachelor's degree and complete. There's also, of course, emphasis on those AA students, those who are seeking a two-year degree, but if they're not aiming to complete a degree, they seem they're institutionally deprioritized, and this happens at the state level through the aid funding mechanisms. So, in addition to other structural barriers I could name, I think where that leaves us is with, okay, how do we tackle this? One big development that I think is making a big difference. We all know that the struggles for contingent faculty, there have been movements for decades. Um, and we have made progress. We have made some incremental bits and pieces of progress to equalize, to close the gaps between part-time and full-time faculty, which are structurally in California de facto the temporary versus the full-time, with very few exceptions. There are some full-timers who may be non-tenure track, but extremely rare. So to close those gaps and even out so that the kinds of job security, the compensation, the access to health care, um, the working conditions, the professional opportunities, so that these are equalized, or made equitable. We now have, and I think this is this leads me into the sort of some of the strategies and some of what we see it's going to take to make the kind of historic change that we want to see, is we now have dedicated work groups uh, that have institutional within our organizations forms of support and structure, and even expectations set to outside constituents for the work that will be done by these groups that we haven't had before. So both CFT, and I can't speak to CTA, I'm not a member of CTA, but CFT and FAC have dedicated work groups, task forces that are made up of both part-time and full-time faculty from throughout the state that meet regularly to hash through the many strategy challenges and strategies, and to come up with a unified vision of what it is that we want to see, conceptualizing a holistic vision of change while imagining the pieces and the parts that might be achieved in the shorter versus the longer term, but keeping that ultimate goal in mind. Right now, the CFT's vision of that ultimate goal is absolute equalization. So everything that I mentioned, the only thing I think I left out was hiring processes and evaluation processes, to make those the same for all faculty and to keep the language of all faculty alive. We certainly have meaningful distinctions between different types of faculty, right? We have those who work in the classroom and those who don't, those who are counselors, those who are librarians, those who teach biology, those who teach kinesiology, those who, like myself, teach English. But insofar as those distinctions among faculty are meaningful, our goal is for those to be the distinctions that that have any bearing on anything, not whether you are at 100% load or you are teaching or working at a lower level. So some of what we're starting to do in CFT is to learn from others who have achieved what we have not. Now, there's not much to look to in the United States. So we in CFT recently engaged the generosity of Frank Costco, from whom you're going to be hearing shortly as a fellow panelist, to answer our questions about how the Vancouver model up in Canada has worked. How have they achieved so much of what we're looking for? We're working on seeking out our allies and building those relationships. In some ways, we're doing what good organizing has always and will always require. We're trying to really get at the heart of and do the kind of research that, as we know, right, we all know this, that even though the struggle's been going on for decades, anyone who's looking for an evidence-based or a research-based justification for the changes we seek isn't going to care about what was documented 20 years ago or what's been known for decades. They want to know, when was this most recently confirmed? So while FAC is working in one direction, CFT is working in one set of ways, FAC, our other statewide organization, not a union, but dedicated to promoting the interests of all faculty, students, and other stakeholders, but faculty is in the name of this organization. It's put together, I think, a very important document that brings together the most recent research that can justify our demands for a different system, a different way of treating faculty. one of the, I think it seems like a no-brainer, but it isn't necessarily, thinking rhetorically about how you assemble those allies and how you convince people to be on your side. It's kind of a no-brainer, but in some ways not, that we've got to put students and the rhetoric of students at the heart of this. As much as we're here under the sort of labor, under the labor umbrella, right? HELU, labor's in the name. We care about the well-being of our employees. We care about those who are treated the worst among our employees. And yet, if we're going to make the structural change we see, we have to be able to explain what we already know, but we've got to exteriorize it and explain how students are at the heart of the changes we seek. That when we casualize labor and when we treat the majority of the of the faculty as temporary, as transitory, as not worthy of the same investment and the same compensation as those in full-time positions, we're selling our students short. So I think I'm going to leave it there. We have plenty of other speakers to hear from, and I hope my remarks had some value. Thank you.
Thank you, Linda Sneed. Thank you for being here. Thank you for your remarks, and particularly that closing emphasis on centering students in all of this. Our next speaker is going to be Frank Costco, which in some ways Linda was preparing us for just a moment ago. Frank has served as president of the Vancouver Community College Faculty Association in British Columbia. Yes, we have a binational event today. We're talking continents, not just countries. As many of you may have heard, the Vancouver model is often referred to as a kind of beacon and as a model for faculty equality within aspiring contingent faculty organizers, as Linda has just alluded. I'm just going to turn it right over to you, Frank. You gave me a very brief bio. You've been involved in VCC for a long time, so please lay it on us. You're to talk. Let us know a little more about this one-tier faculty model, how you got it, and what it looks like. I also want to just point out one more thing. We will have a breakout room specifically allotted for Frank's elaboration of the Vancouver one-tier model after the panel today. So stick around for that.
Hi, thanks a lot, Joe. Excuse me. Thank you, everybody, and appreciate the invitation to speak. And Linda, I was at the CFT summit or something last week, and it was really great to see the union consciousness around this issue, and I appreciated that invitation as well. I don't want to get into a lot of details in these introductory remarks. I just and I see Jack. Jack is there in Bremerton, Washington, and hi, Jack. He's the one that called it the Vancouver model, and has been I call him our PR flack because he promotes that name everywhere he goes, and so it's sort of stuck. And as Jack knows, we sort of call it a normal union model of what work in post-secondary should look like. And as far as I know, with Washington and California examples, we're a community college very similar to the colleges in California and Washington State. And I believe otherwise. It's a great American invention, the community college, and we thank you for it. And it's a place of equity, and it should be a place of equity and respect for the workers there, including the faculty. And it's completely failed in that mission to treat its workers with respect. And as Linda was saying, if you're not treating those workers with respect, you're not treating our students with respect. Our students, even if they're from one end to the other, somebody trying to get into the highest level of technical or university, or somebody's just new in the country struggling with the language so they can improve their lives of their families. They both deserve the same kind of respect, and so do their teachers. And we've been able to do that in Vancouver. We didn't set out to do it. It's just for us, it's been, and I've been challenged to reflect on how we did it and stuff. But essentially, we view the union movement as a social movement. And we view union power as the vehicle for doing and getting and keeping what we have. And it works. You guys in the States are not unaware of this. You have a great union history, and you have great advocates and great models to look at in your union history. We had speakers like Jane McAlevey, for example, come up to Vancouver and tell us about how her organizing ideas, which I understand came out of the 1930s and the CIO movements in the States. So these ideas are out there, but they need to be mobilized in two ways. As Linda was alluding to, developing union culture, the way I put it, is to make it, in effect, unacceptable to talk about these lousy conditions as if they're somehow justified or normal. That should be verboten. That should be culturally taboo, and that kind of sense needs to be developed. And that comes from our leadership in the union movement. So it comes from having in our experience, it comes from, this did not happen through completely what you would call part-time activism. It came from full-timers following the tenets of union membership and union leadership, and making it the ethos of our little union and others in British Columbia that this was the way it was going to be. So we never heard, it became so powerful that we never heard an opposing view. Now, people may have had opposing views, but they knew they were going to be a minority of 2 or 3 in a meeting of 60 or 70, and that's not a very comfortable place to be. So they didn't voice those things. So that's the union culture part of it. And then then you have to have the organization and the union power mobilized around this. We had a few strikes in our history. We weren't afraid to use it. We had free collective bargaining. That's where you need to work on like in California, it's supposed to be a democratic state, and Governor Newsom is a very articulate fellow, but he needs to back off. Let you guys bargain the way you need to bargain. All these rules and controls around bargaining need to be taken off and let the unions bargain. That's the way we do it in BC. The government only sets the most basic rules around bargaining, and then you go at it. So anyway, the two things, union culture and union power, need to be mobilized around this issue to make it completely unacceptable that this is going to survive. And even all of you activists on this call, need to think about 10 years from now, looking back at 2024. Jack knows I used to say this 10 years ago, but in 2014, what's it going to look like in 2024? And I'm sad to say it looks about the same. So what are you going to do in 2034? I mean, how long is this going to go on? And anyway, later on, I'll elaborate. We essentially have all these conditions. We're a normal community college with normal funding problems and normal student bodies and normal screw-ups and internal fights and external fights, but we have it's doable and possible. Our college still breaks even and sometimes even makes a little surplus, but everybody is paid equitably from day one. Anyway, I'll shut up for a while and come back to the little group later. Thank you again for the opportunity.
Great. Thank you, Frank Costco. Thank you very much. And again, Frank kept it short, which we appreciate, but also we know he has extra space to elaborate on some of the details about how this system was established at DCC and also what it looks like in practice. I'm sure many of us have questions. There will be a breakout session for that later. Our next speaker is going to be Diana Valera. Diana Valera is our one non-community college faculty member on the panel tonight, but we invited her because we believe that she has much to offer a community college center discussion. Diana Valera is contingent faculty in the photography department at Columbia College Chicago, CCC, and president of of CCC Faculty Union, or CFAC Local 6602. That's IFT, AFT, AFL-CIO. Diana served as chief negotiator and in 2023 led the longest part-time faculty strike in U.S. history, 49 days. Valera serves as Illinois AAUP conference secretary and has presented on numerous panels concerning collective bargaining, and has written about that in a chapter on collective bargaining in the volume Fighting Academic Repression and Neoliberal Education. Diana's work centers on bridging AAUP and union principles and the values of diversity, equity, and belonging. Diana, thank you for joining us here today, and solidarity after your historic strike at CCC.
Thank you, Joe, and thank you, everyone. Joe, if I'm able to share my screen. So being a visual artist, I hope you're all okay. I did do a presentation. It helps me to be able to walk you through a little bit, and I will make it brief, about our strike. Oops. And hold on one second. I'll just go ahead and share. I think, Joe, if you could put it back out again, I'll go ahead and share my screen. Okay. Okay. If you all see that, I'll go ahead and start the slideshow. So I'm hoping what you'll see out of the presentation I'm about to give, which is really a little bit of a visual story of our strike that just ended in late December of 2023. And hopefully we can see some similarities and we can talk about that. So let me go ahead and, all right. So I think what we just heard our previous speaker talk about is those inequalities, right? So, we centered some of our conversations around the dramatic inequality. Columbia is certainly facing that. We are contingent faculty. We intentionally have, our union is called Columbia Faculty Union. And, we started many of our meetings with different speakers and different contexts of what's happening on a national and global scale. So I'll briefly introduce this one.
All right, we now turn to a man who has spent his career advocating for the rights of workers, Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders. Last week, he showed up at a UAW rally in Detroit where he called for an end to corporate greed and for the rebuilding of America's middle class. I spoke with the independent senator earlier this week and asked him what's led to this recent resurgence of organized labor.
Look, what's going on and what has gone on in this country over the last 50 years, 50 years, is really extraordinary. Today, the weekly wages of the average American worker, despite an explosion of technology over the last 50 years, is lower than it was 50 years ago. Meanwhile, almost all of the new wealth and income that we have seen over that period has gone to the top 1%. So today, unbelievably, you got 3 people in a...
All right, I'm going to stop that for time's sake and just move on right now. So what we're talking about at Columbia and what we're seeing, and we're an art school, we're a liberal arts school. It's a fine arts focus. And so what we tried to bring out is that, look, there's a public support that's happening across this country. Of course, it's fluctuated, but currently we're seeing a lot of strikes. We're seeing more awareness. We're seeing that support and understanding of why unions are important right now. So we focused a lot on that in educating. And just very briefly, 2 weeks before the fall semester began, the provost office mandated the elimination of over 340 courses to save about $2 million. This is what we all are experiencing in these cuts, these eliminations, these mergers. These courses, of course, were not under-enrolled. And it only impacted contingent faculty and, of course, our student learning. And we focused on student learning. So we were in the middle of bargaining. And that was, for us, important because we were able to use the power of bargaining and what we were able to do with bargaining, and, of course, leading to a strike. So I'm going to move a little bit quickly through this. We all understand what many of these institutions are doing shock doctrine, doing this crisis that is a created crisis often, all too often, that's going on. What we focused on is starting to do a financial forensic of the institution itself, and really what has happened over the last 10 years of what, at best could be called mismanagement. And we started to show this inequity. Our president makes over $1 million. The bonuses alone in 1 year was $252,000. When we started to really highlight this to our students, to our communities, to everyone, frankly, people were really upset, very upset that this was going on. And we started to talk about how you can save money, and gave examples of how we can do that. And I think we can all share in these examples. And then we focused on Our Students Matter. Over 35% of our students come from the Chicago public school system. Our students represent a lot of the Black and Brown communities. And we focused on our students' need, the kind of education, and we focused on the public good. And so I'm going to skip over some of this because of the crisis and the money that we did expose that what was really going on. For time's sake, I'll do it in the breakout session. So of course we talked about, is this a sustainable model? And it's not. How many years of bad decisions are we willing to take before we stand up? And fortunately, we're in a state and we have a union. And so we asked the question, is it time for a change? We experienced an administration that was prioritizing, in our opinion, their own greed over student learning and certainly the well-being of the faculty and staff. And we talked about where is our power. And we reminded everyone, as Joe described what's happening across this country is, Columbia College was founded on 100% contingent faculty. We still make up the majority of the faculty at Columbia College. And we reminded everyone where our power is. And we even looked at states where, you don't have the power to unionize, but look what's happening in those states. And so we created a real, what we called a real town hall in October. And we didn't expect what was about to happen. And it was just overflow of students pouring in. We had 2 overflow rooms. We started to engage our students, our faculty. Everybody wanted to get involved. We stayed after that day and created demands and created these signs. The very next day, unexpectedly, we went to the president, who was delivering speeches to parents. And we went into that $50 million building and stormed in to that presentation. Students read the demands. Parents were upset. Many of them come from unions. Chicago's a union town. I, of course, got on the stage with our president and provost and began answering questions from parents. And then parents got out there and started to talk to the students. That kind of engagement led to an 88% of membership who voted to strike late in October, huge turnout, and everybody was involved. We all got involved. I'll go into more detail on how we were able to do this. But, we really, as I said, we're an art school. We talked about resistance as joy, being out there with our students. We have the dance community out there. How are we going to build community? Because this expands beyond, of course, even our students. And we did just that. And they underestimated us because we're contingent faculty, because we're economically vulnerable. But what I'm most proud of is the faculty that sustained this 49-day strike is, they did it for the right reasons. And we stayed on target with our messaging consistently throughout. It wasn't about money. It wasn't about any of that. It was really about our students and that our students matter and student learning, quality of education. And to tie in with some of the other speakers is our focus was about job security. Job security that in some institutions they call it tenure, but we call it job security. It's job security. So, and of course we engaged a lot of the politicians. We had 16 city aldermen, 8 state senators, everyone got involved. Randy Weingarten came. You know, we just had a lot of engagement. We got a lot of publicity. We had a lot of publicity constantly taking place. And then we even engaged the parents. Every Sunday night we had Zoom with parents, and it kept growing. And we engaged, of course, what we do best, which is our art, our music, and we were out there constantly. And so we had open bargaining. Our opening bargaining was packed, and we winded up live streaming it. I was surprised the administration allowed that, but we did. And again, we just kept expanding and engaging, and we kept staying on message, which is, as I said, it's about our students. It's our students, and we want to provide them the quality of education. And so, and connecting it with that, serving that public good and why that matters. And so our students started to lead a lot of marches then, and they started to show the inequity. They were disgusted at the inequity that, you know, here's a president, and they went to his mansion and started to say, you know, why is our tuition going up? Why are we being impacted by this? And so eventually we finally reached a tentative agreement. After 49 days, we sustained the longest adjunct strike in the country. The numbers that voted on the tentative agreement just, I think, demonstrates the engagement that we were able to sustain. And again, I'll go quickly through this. Students were amazing throughout this whole thing. And, you know, again, for us, it was the issues. It's what our values around unionism, diversity, equity, and belonging, and those AUP principles that we remained focused on. And it really, you know, for us, that is what sustained it. And we're able to build that kind of unity. We're not done yet. Right now, we're in the focus of rebuilding. And that's, you know, today the president has stepped down. You know, they are making significant changes. That mansion is going to be sold. So we were able to make some significant changes. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Diana. I think I'm going to try to unspotlight you. I think you are still stuck in the spotlight here. So let's go back and make sure we're not. Okay, I think that does it. Our next speaker is going to be Carol Lang. Carol Lang has been teaching at Bronx Community College in the CUNY system for about 14 years and is presently delegate to the Professional Staff Congress and an EC member of her local chapter. She has fought for years against cutbacks and discrimination, even before earning her PhD in history, having worked as a secretary at CUNY and earning her degree while working in campus offices and being active in the Municipal Workers Union. Carol fights for a more equal CUNY and for a better society, which includes, in her view, fighting for the rights of all workers. Carol, welcome. And make sure to unmute yourself, Carol, so we can hear you.
Hi, everybody can see that sign behind me, which says real wages or we strike. Unfortunately, I'm looking for my thing now. I just lost it. We don't have the right to strike at CUNY. And so in general, the union leadership has been participating in attempting to, you know, assuage our fears that we won't have, you know, that eventually we'll get a decent contract. But at this point, there's no particular reason why we should have a decent contract, given the fact that we don't have the right to strike. And I just want to tell a quick story. I have a friend who's an adjunct she was on a 3-year contract because that's the best you can get from CUNY. And now she's laid off. And she called me and she said, I don't know what I'm going to do about healthcare, because the only way to get healthcare is to teach 2 classes at CUNY, and each class had to be three credits. And because she doesn't have any more courses, she doesn't have healthcare. And she sort of jokingly said to me, well, you know, maybe I'll end up having to get married to get some health care. And I thought, my God, that's really a throwback. Instead of fighting to advance us, this poor woman is now thinking about how she can save her health care by ending up marrying somebody who will, protect her, because unfortunately the union hasn't done it. Okay, so I'm sure everyone is aware that this decision to defund the universities is not a budgetary one, but is a political one. And I agree exactly with the previous speaker about what, the racism that's all involved in this. In New York City alone, there were 360 billionaires, and yet there is not enough funds to keep the lights on at CUNY or to pay us a decent salary. The only organization that represents the adjuncts at CUNY is unfortunately not an independent organization. It's called Committee for Adjuncts and Part-Timers, and it's an appendage of the union. And so basically it doesn't do anything or think outside the box. It doesn't do anything that's going to be independent or upset the union leadership. And we are not really able to come up with our own strategies. Before 1969 and the takeover at City College by Black students, City College, the Harvard of public education, and the City University in general was almost exclusively white. After the 1969 strike, where open admissions was created to allow all students who graduated high school, Blacks and Latins found a place at the university's hallowed halls. By 1976, tuition was imposed and things got worse from there on in. Throughout the Great Depression, CUNY was free. We are here from across the country because our conditions are much the same. That is, there is a big hole in the state and city budgets where education is a line item. We are here from New York, from Indiana, Massachusetts, California, with the same issues, albeit with some differences depending on the state. And in our state, we don't have the right to strike. But we were all here because we care about education. We all understand that our students are being cheated because the government does not want them to learn. And so it provides a paltry amount of money to that end. Thus, if we are to take anything away from this event, we need to understand, while mobilizing on a university-wide level, we also have to mobilize nationally as well. And that is HALU's mission. The two-tier system, that is the fact that there are privileged workers, quote, privileged workers, namely the full-timers, and that there are part-timers who are felt to be undeserving, is the reason why this panel and one of the root causes of the weakness of our unions. Adjuncts play an outsized role in keeping CUNY and the other universities afloat, but we are told at the same time that we are not worthy of earning a decent salary. After all, we are just adjuncts, people who only add marginally to the success of the university, unlike the full-timers who are real members of the community. Since this is a discussion about community colleges and about the two-tiered system that plagues the faculty in general and the contingent faculty in particular, I will discuss what is happening at my college, Bronx Community College. But I know, as I've stated above, that this is not particular to BCC. As the administration becomes more and more top-heavy, less and less funds are provided to the faculty and to needed services for the students. And this has just already been stated, a number of times. At CUNY, there is one counselor for every 1,600 students. And as I've mentioned in my story about my friend Dominique, who is now searching for healthcare, some of the adjuncts who have received a 3-year appointment are now at risk of losing this little bit of job security that we have obtained over a long period of struggle. With the loss of 2 courses, there will be a loss of healthcare since an adjunct has to teach 6 credits. I'm afraid that the union leadership, while trying to guarantee that things will work out for us, really has no strategy to guarantee this, And so they bemoaned the miserliness of CUNY management and how this will impact us all, but there is little substance to their crocodile tears. This is why I ran as a delegate and am a member of the BCC chapter of my union. I remember in the 70s when almost no one was an adjunct except for someone with expertise in some discipline. The rest of the faculty were all full-timers. This is no longer the case at CUNY. To say that CUNY is top-heavy is an understatement, and to say that the adjuncts are carrying the university is an understatement. There are 11,000 adjuncts as opposed to 7,000 full-timers at CUNY. There is no doubt that everyone is being slammed, but the adjuncts, although we only get paid for the hour that we teach and an office hour, we are now required to learn more technology without being remunerated. What good fortune for the administration that we care about our students and want to make sure that they learn. The two-tier system is throughout the university, but the community colleges are not funded as well as the senior colleges. They are often given grants by the government or by arms industries, since that promotes the agenda of US imperialism. This disparity is not only unfair, but is racist and sexist, as well as because the full-timers are generally white and male, although this is beginning to shift a bit. But by and large, the adjuncts are women and people of color. My union, while fighting for parity at the bargaining table, is being told that we should not be expecting much. In fact, at a bargaining meeting that I attended, the lead negotiator at the time said, "Do you think this is Harvard or Yale?" So far, after a year of bargaining, management has not stated what crumbs it wishes to throw our way. The university runs on the labor of adjuncts. There is no way that the university will give us parity. And because there is a law in New York City which denies us our right to strike, the union leadership is reluctant to go out. I might add that New York City is probably one of the most expensive cities to live in, so our salaries are not a minor consideration. As I was saying, the midterm grades that I just put in reminded me that only junior colleges have to put in midterm grades, but we also have to put in pre-midterm grades. So we're doing much more work than the senior colleges. And when in fact, their argument is that teachers who teach in the senior colleges do more work. I remember that because I work in the community colleges that we are required to do all of this. We are now in the middle of changing platforms from Blackboard to Brightspace, but there is no remuneration for this extra work that we are required to do to learn it. And although the full-timers do not get remuneration either, at least they get a full-time salary. And so the need for parity is crucial, since once again, adjuncts are a crucial reason why CUNY is able to stay afloat. The administration at BCC is so hostile that our vice chair was invited to step outside at a budget meeting by the president of the school. When we discussed the incident at the chapter meeting, unfortunately, a number of the full-timers sort of made allowances for the president, which just goes to show that they have they're in need of an elevation of consciousness. As for responding to the attacks by management, thankfully, there are now people in the union who have had enough and have organized a strike school where there are strike stewards at in a variety of campuses, and I'm one of those stewards. I will be one of those stewards at BCC. We have a meeting on Monday. The situation is untenable, and the learning outcomes are miserable at best. The union leadership, while understanding that this is untenable, will not flex its muscles in order to win those demands. Not defying the Taylor law means that we can wait for years before a substandard contract is reached, and where by the time we reach an agreement, inflation has eroded all the gains. I think all of us who work for higher education must organize a national day of action, maybe on May Day, to send a message that not only are we demanding fairness and equity, but that we believe that the US war machine needs to stop killing people in Gaza. And since the struggle for survival in Gaza is integrally connected to our struggle at home, we must think not only nationally, but internationally as well. Like our government, which denies the need for quality education because the capitalists do not want a literate thinking working class, the Israeli government has bombed all the universities in Gaza. Education is crucial to a society that wishes to understand what is happening in the world and possibly building a new society. I just want to mention that we should not continue to allow ourselves to be pitted against full-timers, because this is about all of us. Higher education will not be guaranteed if we do not fight as one. That is, nobody will win if all of us don't win. It is in the interest of management to pit us against each other. We cannot allow that to happen. Our union leadership must be made to fight for everyone, or they must be ousted. Finally, we have to stop relying on the bourgeois politicians, and I believe we have to build a Labor Party that will speak for all workers. I genuinely believe that a more radical consciousness is beginning to emerge. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Carol. Thank you, Carol Lang, for that. I do think contemporary events in the news you alluded to make the establishment of academic freedom and a right to speak about important public issues more urgent than ever. And we will have a breakout room after the panel on building strike power, the challenges as well as opportunities for building strike capacity, and also another session on linking academic freedom and job security. After all, how can people have academic freedom in practice if they don't even know if they're going to be hired back the next semester? All right, speaking of building part-time, full-time, non-tenure track to tenure track solidarity, our last speaker in our 5-person panel is Kalina Sisenker. Kalina is professor of philosophy at Connecticut State Gateway in New Haven, Connecticut, and political director of her union, the 4 Cs. That's SEIU 1973, a former contingent faculty member. Kalina is on the tenure track last time I checked. And Kalina, I'm so glad to have you with us today.
Hi, all. Sorry.
There you go. Good. There you
My
are.
mute button for a second there. Yeah, so I'm going to speak a little bit to the ways that this fight ends up being not just a unified fight, as Carol just mentioned, but a fight that extends well beyond higher ed. Right. So just a little background. In 2017, 2017 in Connecticut was like a really rough year for community colleges. The state legislature was at this stalemate over the entire state budget. It extended 123 days after, it was supposed to be decided. And it was solved with a compromise that involved a trio of caps on state spending that limited what the state could appropriate and spend on services. It shunted instead like all of the funds, extra revenue, towards a rainy day fund and to pay down state pension liabilities. And it's all held in place by this thing called a bond lock that is an as yet untested sort of legal mechanism that constitutes a promise to Wall Street that those cap restrictions would remain unchanged for a period of several years. So in effect, tying the hands of even the next legislative body to spend on things like higher ed and all other state services. A month after that, the Connecticut Board of Regents for Higher Ed proposed its initial quantification of projected savings for the consolidation of its 12 community colleges and was scheduled for completion in June 2023. And the state savings that they were trying to extract were going to be extracted from the college serving the student body with the highest levels of poverty and students from historically marginalized communities, just a shameless disinvestment in the working class. So the plan for the consolidation involved no shared governance, and it sought to implement a suite of reforms sourced from a network of national think tanks, like the CCRC, right, Community College Resource Center, housed at Columbia University, Illumina, you know, all these Achieving the Dream, Guided Pathways initiatives, all funded by the same small network of corporate sources. This is a group that Robin Isserlis, she's out of the Borough of Manhattan Community College in New York, and she's come to call them the new edu-philanthropists in her book, The Cost of Completion, that addresses the completion agenda that we've heard mentioned before. I think Linda mentioned it. And unlike traditional philanthropies that might give funds directly to institutions, these groups instead fund think tanks that provide remedies for the so-called problems as they see them that our institutions face. And what they do is they provide solutions for students and for us in our classrooms to buck up under austerity. But what they don't do is theorize about the policies and funding mechanisms that would actually change the landscape. In true neoliberal fashion, they put the responsibility on faculty, staff, and students, and their solutions involve things like 15 to finish, invasive advising, elimination of developmental ed, the guided pathways initiatives that are not always, because they are underfunded, implemented correctly. So what they actually serve to do is buttress austerity. And, you know, in a presentation, I was on a panel on this sort of thing earlier this week and presenting with the president of FAC in California, et cetera. And as I hear what is going on in California, what struck me was that it's not only that we are being subjected to the exact same measures of success and these sorts of invasive remedies, but that they were also implemented at the exact same time. So like 2017 is when Assembly Bill 705, which was then followed by 1705, it was introduced in California at the same time that we are dealing with what we're dealing with in Connecticut, right? So what we're moving towards is sort of performance-based funding for community colleges. All of this is a structure that defines community colleges and measures community colleges by a model that inevitably will over-rely on adjunct faculty, on contingent staff, while just expanding the administrative structure, right? So that was what our model was. This is what we're seeing almost nationally. What these think tanks should be proposing are things like funding models, public policy, tax structure, housing policies. These are the kinds of things that will actually address the problems that our institutions face. But higher ed is always under attack because it's often the largest pot of discretionary spending, because there's always potential for another source of revenue, tuition from our students, and that has allowed state support to dwindle in the last 15 years nationwide. The very same Wall Street sources that support the kinds of austerity, that kind of austerity, and resist the kinds of taxation that would allow these community colleges to thrive, also fund think tanks that churn out the best practices that we find in our classrooms. And again, the solutions they offer lie in over-reliance on, you know, structures and models for colleges that involve over-reliance on contingent workers and student grit and momentum. So to solve the problems in our classrooms of our students, of our labor models, et cetera, to take on the problem of contingency, we have to take on, in Connecticut, the entire state budget. And that is a huge fight. And to fend off the inevitable barrage of attacks, even if we fight this one, that will come next, because there's such a well-funded now network of places that are always providing these solutions that support this kind of austerity. We are going to have to take on a national network of folks that are theorizing in the opposite direction from us. And they seek to capture public funds and institutions for their own ends, to create on multiple levels in our institutions and outside a precarious and exploitable workforce, right? Our students, our faculty. So When the Consolidated College opened on July 1st, it opened with a $140 million deficit, and we shed hundreds of contingent faculty and staff almost immediately. We had been advocating for shifting the ratio of full-time and part-time in our system. We had 75% part-time faculty and staff, 25% full-time. Unfortunately, we shifted it, but we shifted it by simply losing our part-time members, and we stand to lose so much more. Our administration has chosen to address this deficit by only asking the state for enough money to protect full-time permanent workers. They are fine with shedding as many adjuncts and as many part-time staff as they need. And so much of our workforce is contingent and can be dropped at a moment's notice. So the point is this fight does not get fought. It does not get won without full-timers and part-timers working together throughout. It also does not get won without addressing the statewide and national austerity push that is well-funded, well-organized, and years in the making. So for us, what that has taken is to build coalitions. We have aligned, there are 5 professional faculty and staff unions in the system, other unions around that. We have built a coalition of almost 70 faith groups, unions, and orgs that work together in a coalition we call bargaining, that's built on a bargaining for the common good framework that we call Recovery for All. It used to be called, Connecticut for All used to be called Recovery for All. And what that allows us to do is on a statewide level, fight for what we're actually fighting for, which is livable working class lives and dignity for all workers across the board. The ones that they're trying to help make us educate, the future exploitable working class, and our adjuncts and part-timers and other contingent workers in our system. So none of our students are going to succeed without public policies that address not only higher ed, but food insecurity, cost of housing, healthcare access, stable wages, and strong labor protections to keep them at the right levels. It requires shifting the legislative landscape. It requires setting precedents for even our workers, right? As long as we have this baseline of exploitation, it makes things worse for our students. So at the moment, things look hopeful. This coalition building has been powerful. And it actually looks like we have a shot at winning this fight for funding, which will then allow us to have the fight with our administration for our structure. But, 3 days ago, it didn't look hopeful. A week before that, we thought we won. We are still fighting it through. But I think this sort of bargaining for the common good coalition and the broader fight against austerity is the thing that I think we are fighting in the right direction. It feels like we have the tools that eventually, as we continue to build, will allow us to win. So that's where we are in Connecticut.
Thank you, Kalina. Thank you for that broad overview of a really urgent statewide fight that has resonance elsewhere. Thank you to all our panelists. First off, that's a great panel of 5 speakers. I think, really touched on and dug into so many important issues and so many links emerging. We're going to take about 10, maybe 13 minutes for questions directly for the panel. We had the organizers before the event decided that we would actually ask folks that had questions to write them in the chat box to just try to keep things streamlined and focused to make the best use of this time. And we've actually asked another member of the contingency task force, another California adjunct faculty and activist, Scott Douglas, to relay a couple of the standout questions from the chat box. If you have a question for any of our speakers, from Linda Sneed, Frank Costco, Diana Valera, Carol Lang, and Kalina Sasenko, please feel free to put them in the chat box. Well, hopefully we can do 2 rounds, but I think Scott has at least 2 questions. We thought we might take 2 or 3 at a time and then go back to the panel, just asking the panelists to be brief, brilliant, but brief, always a difficult combination, but and maybe we can do 2 rounds of this. Scott, please share what you got so far from the chat box.
Thank you, Joe, and thank you to all the speakers. I have been monitoring the chat, picked up a few questions and a few ideas from various folks with help from Joe and John Holmes. Thank you, folks. And what I'm seeing is a couple of trends. And in the interest of time, instead of specifically calling out individual questions, I want to ask sort of generic questions, a couple of them that I think touch on some of the issues I'm seeing. And the first thing I want to talk about is a recognition that we have folks here from right to work states where striking is not permissible. We also have Diana here, who recently accomplished a tremendous strike with much success. And the question that's motivating right now was a question about whether or not striking is integral and key to accomplish anything over collective bargaining in and of itself. And I thought, in light of the two scenarios and situations, it would be great to ask the panelists, those two in particular, and maybe even Frank. I don't know if you've ever done any striking up in Vancouver to get where you are, to just comment briefly on their opinions and views about whether striking is essential and how do we proceed in a right to work state? And if you would please tie this into a recognition that in community colleges with so many contingents who are often part-time and not engaged and present, even organizing a strike might be difficult. So I'd like to start, I think, with Diana to address that theme, and then we'll move on from there.
Hi, thank you. Look, it was difficult. We're contingent faculty, which we represent faculty who work often at 4 or 5 institutions, multiple jobs. But hopefully, what we were able to do is to demonstrate that our faculty, and I know this is true at all faculty institutions, part-time, full-time, they care about the quality of education. They care about the same things that all the faculty do. And, so I do think it's important on a national level to continue to fight for, the right to form unions and the right to strike. That is certainly something that we should all make sure that we're fighting for. But I think even in the presentation, I was able to tie in that there's this public support for unions right now, and that the power really is about those coalitions and that building that kind of community. I do think it's going to be easier in some ways in a state like ours where we can demonstrate that even if we're contingent, we could build those kind of coalitions and fight back against these kind of austere measures that we're seeing taking place, but that we're going to help our colleagues in other states as well, and that the power is still within the people. And I think that kind of coalition building can take place. Thank you.
Thank you. Holly, same question from a different perspective, perhaps. I'm sorry, Carol.
Well, coming from a non-right to work state, basically city workers don't have the right to strike, even though private workers have the right to strike in New York. And I've been in this for many, many years in many, many contracts, and still the average salary of an adjunct for a course is $5,500 for a course. We had demanded in the last contract that we get 10,000. The contract before that, we demanded 7,000. And yet, the union came back with like this was the best they could do, 555. And I think if we have the right, whether we have the right to strike or not, if we did strike, I think that it's the only power that workers have is to withhold our labor. We have nothing else. We talk and management talks and management thumbs their nose at us. And as I said in my presentation, they said, do you work at Princeton or Yale that you think that you deserve to have a decent salary? Do you think you have the right to live in the city where you work? I mean, it was profoundly arrogant, humiliating. And I think that we can show them that we mean business if we strike. And I think that's the only way that we're going to do it, which is why I'm happy that people are now beginning to not only support other people's strikes, but to start organizing strike schools and discuss the question of where our power really is. And I think that, raises the whole question of democracy and unions. There's just profoundly a tremendous amount of questions that striking will raise if we actually go ahead and do that. If we don't, then I think, more and more contingent workers are going to be laid off, and more students will end up in classes that are oversized, and the situation will continue to plummet. So I think absolutely striking is fundamental.
Excellent. Thank you, Carol. I see Frank wants to chime in. I'm very happy to see you here, Frank. Go ahead.
Hi. Hi, thanks. Yeah, obviously it's a difficulty when you don't have the technical right to strike, and these governments can bring the power of the state against you. And it's in those cases very important to have sort of a cultural strike where you have the community and the students and the parents behind you. Up here in BC, our K-12 teachers once did a significant quote-unquote illegal strike, and that helped inspire the Chicago teachers with their big strike a few years ago. So it can happen, but it's difficult, and you need to have that cultural thing. But one point I want to make is those states and organizations that do have the right to strike, if they haven't used it or threatened to use it or had a strike vote in the last 20 years, what the hell is it for? Surely in the rounds of bargaining, you have something to get upset about and at least threaten a strike vote. I've found we've had about 5 or 6 strike votes over my tenure and 3 or 4 strikes, only one really significant one back in 1990. But if you don't use your right to strike, then it's meaningless. So I think there's a big responsibility on those areas that do have the right, to use it responsibly, but to not shy away from it. We have some unions that think, oh my God, go on strike, let me out of here. That's crazy. That's as people have said, that's your significant power, and it needs to be used. Thanks.
Excellent. Thank you, Frank. Linda or Kalina, do you wish to add anything to this conversation?
I'll just jump in. I think that what Joe Barry wrote in the chat, I imagine some folks are not paying attention in the chat. It's always hard to do that when you're listening to people speak or the one who's speaking themselves. But yeah, I'll just point to that.
In fact, if I could just jump in there, we were planning to thank you, Linda, to read Joe Barry's comments aloud, because the first one is clarifying and the second one is, I think, inspiring. The first comment that Joe Barry, as I'm sure many of you know, very frequently a speaker on a HELU event, Joe Barry writes, there are really, well, actually, let me do the other comment first. Right to work, he says, has nothing to do with the denial of the right to strike, though they often overlap in the same states and reflect an anti-labor climate. Just to give an example, in Massachusetts, where I am, we are not a right to work state. We have collective bargaining rights, but for public sector employees, including university professors at UMass Boston, we are not allowed to strike, right? So those two things are distinct, though they often overlap. But then the follow-up, the more inspirational, I think, politically clarifying point from Joe that I think applies to my own institution at UMass Boston as well. There are really no illegal strikes, just strikes that are not strong enough to win. The massive statewide strikes of 2018 to 2019, he writes, all in states where striking was illegal, show this lesson. And I will, if I may, cite the book that Joe and Helena Worthen wrote together, Power Despite Precarity. I believe they say in that book, essentially, laws have a way of changing after enough people break them, which is a reminder of social movements' history of challenging unjust laws, and labor action certainly can be included under that umbrella. Anyway, thank you, Joe Barry, for those comments, which are clarifying and, as we say, inspiring. Scott, maybe one more question from the list.
Indeed. The next question I would like to do is going to switch themes a little bit. I want to talk about job security. I know that in Canada, Frank, you have a system in place which deals with something called regularization. I'll let you talk more about that in a minute. I believe that Diana talked about tenure and preferring to use the word job security, potentially because I guess technically if you have tenure, you're not contingent, right? And we've talked a lot about, I've heard a lot of part-time adjunct contingent faculty talk about the inherent difficulties when they see tenured faculty seeing our growth and feeling threatened that tenure is under attack. And I believe tenure is under attack. But what I'd like you to do, and I'll start with Frank, is focus on job security in the wake of the conflict there between that contingent and tenure.
Well, well, we don't have that conflict. Maybe it's a cultural thing. It just doesn't exist. I don't know. We full-timers, or what you would call full-timers, never felt threatened in our situation by the extension of rights to what you would call part-timers. Nothing was taken away from the full-timers, and they always had more seniority, and they always had more job security. When I bargain, I use the phrase "cookies for all." In our agenda, we have cookies for everybody: the people about to retire, the department heads, the new people, people with families. We try to have a cookie for everybody and keep everybody happy. It's a balanced bargaining agenda. So we've always approached it that way. In my discussions with Americans, I find the word tenure is problematic because there's something called classical tenure, I guess, from the 1200s in Europe, where universities needed this protection from the state so that they would have a form of academic freedom. And it wasn't, it's not like as a direct link to wages, but you had the right to study what you needed to study and say what you needed to say. That's great, and should exist and should continue to exist. But in the community college system, and I don't understand why that's linked to wages. That's a fatal flaw with that thing, that only the people with tenure get the wages. I don't think the wages are necessary. If you're interested in that academic freedom, it shouldn't be a link to wages. But anyway, I'm sorry, that's a historical diversion. By using the word tenure, people in the community college, and I even saw this last week when I was in California, think that they have lifetime job security just because they use the word tenure. But other union activists were telling me, no, people can be laid off even if they quote unquote have tenure. And to me, that's a normal situation. If there's funding issues or student demand issues, people can be laid off. It needs to be done with a whole suite of job provisions, notice, recall, severance pay, et cetera, to protect, and political action to stop the cuts, et cetera, of course. But to me, our situation is quote unquote normal. People can be laid off if there's good reason, and there's a political cost for the institution to do that. But using the word tenure has clouded the issue because people, I think, mix it up with that lifetime job security that, to one degree or another, might exist in classical research universities. And I think that confuses things. We don't have that, and we didn't use that word. We used the word regularization. And regularization is basically, okay, that's it. You're in the institution until you retire. And for the vast majority of people, that's how it works.
Thank you,
Thanks.
Frank. Diana, I'd like to ask you the same question, and then we're going to wrap this up because we are running long.
Yeah, thank you for that. You know, I think this is such an important part for all of us in higher ed. If you do look historically, you know, when you know, it's about a little bit over 100 years ago that academic freedom came into place, and the need for job security, right? You can't have academic freedom if you don't have job security. At the time, most of the faculty were tenure faculty. But if we care about the same principles, and we should, and we ought to, that all faculty need to have academic freedom, then we need to change our language. And that's why I was intentional about using job security, because after all, job security, you know, we know, I almost think of it as I hate to use the word antiquated, but it is tenure for some. When the majority of the faculty across this country are non-tenure, then it needs to be job security. And that language of tenure, a job security status only for full-time faculty works to divide us and not, and it's not necessary. The language of job security includes tenure. So I would advocate to change it to job security.
Thank you. Very quickly, anyone else on the panel wish to comment very briefly? Hearing none, I'll turn this back over to Joe.
Oh, I'm sorry. Can I just add quickly? We have a separate academic freedom clause which applies to everybody from their first day of work. So we separate academic freedom security through our union processes from your job status as a new instructor or a senior instructor. Thank you.
Thank you, Frank. Anyone
Thank
else?
you. Thank you. I think for time, Scott, I'm going to jump in here. You know, we actually were just about on time from our schedule. We did start 5-10 minutes late today, and so we're moving along here. I just want to say that I think there's some really interesting issues here, and there's a chance to dig into them in the breakout rooms, and those breakout rooms will result in report backs back to the full discussion after the breakout rooms. We're going to go into breakouts for about a half an hour right now, plenty of time to discuss in small groups. And these breakout rooms, I've already shared them in the chat box a couple of times, but I'm going to open them now. This should mean that the group's open for you and you can choose your way into a group. We have 8 groups. I'll just say them aloud for the people who may be watching this later. We have one to hear more about room 1 will be to hear more about the 1-tier system at Vancouver Community College. Group number 2 will be about responding to cutbacks. Room number 3 will be about building union democracy. Room number 4 will be about linking academic freedom and job security, something that's been coming up in a different form just a moment ago. Room number 5 will be about taking part-time and adjunct issues seriously. Room 6, challenges and opportunities to build strike power. Room 7, overcoming divide and rule on our campus, including but not limited to the division of tenure track, non-tenure track, full-time from part-time faculty, as well as staff and students. And finally, last but not least, room 8 will focus on legislative efforts, including current campaigns that are exciting people, but also the promise and pitfalls of legislative strategy in relationship to organizing for contingent faculty. I'm going to open the rooms now, and I hope to see you in one of them. Please pick your room, and we'll be back in a half an hour as a full group. All right, folks, welcome back from your breakout sessions. I know those breakout sessions are never long enough, but we're looking forward to hearing some report backs. I think we had some consolidation of groups, you know, with the number of folks we had here. Some groups drew more than others, which is always interesting to see. So I'm not sure we'll have a report back from all 8 groups, but I believe we have quite a few that met. And if group 1 could jump in, we're going to ask each group to kind of give us a couple of key points. You don't have to give us everything that was said. You can put that in your notes and we can put that in a Google Doc, which we can share. But if you have a couple of key points, questions, or proposals or main takeaways, maybe 2 minutes, 3 minutes tops from each group, that would be great. And then our hope is to open it up for 15 or 20 minutes of discussion where we can kind of build on and synthesize some of the stuff that comes out of the group. So could someone from group 1 jump in if you know who you are? I believe group 1 was focused on the 1-tier. That was a very popular group I saw, the 1-tier model with Frank Costco. What did y'all learn? What did you talk about?
Do it, Holly.
Yeah, Holly, could you,
Oh,
Holly was
okay.
our chair.
guess.
Thank you.
Well, I guess. Well, Frank was gave a very concise but thorough detail about the Vancouver model, which has many features in it to provide job security to in the form of regularization. And the details are, I can't recount all of them here, but one of them is that anyone who is hired is immediately on this track toward regularization. And there's a lot of job protection for anyone who does it. There's slightly less benefits for somebody who continues to teach less than 50%, but they still have fairly strong job security. And those who are regularized fairly quickly after, I think, it's only a couple years, and they're regularized and they can be regularized to permanent part-time. And he described it as once you're kind of hired into this system, you're there until you retire. Although you can be gotten rid of for, and programmatic and enrollment issues, but that hasn't happened often. Our discussion led to how was this achieved? And one of the key takeaways was that for Frank was that they had very strong leadership that was full-time union members who supported regularization. And yet other institutions represented in our group have much more tension between full-time tenure track faculty and adjunct faculty, and therefore they see regularization among too many adjunct faculty as a threat. So we discussed why is that. Frank put his finger on the importance of culture and people recognizing that equity and job security for all is important for the profession as a whole. Does anybody else want to add something? I don't want to take too much time in giving our summary.
I think you nailed it, Holly.
Holly.
I was just going to add that even though I've been thinking about this for months and years, there's just like a clarity in my mind based on Frank's very simple kind of, I don't even understand why full-time faculty would see this as a threat. And those of us who have experienced that form of what John Govsky in our group called just a fundamental elitism among some full-time faculty, that it's sort of the system. And then Holly, you put it as sometimes even in our union leadership, the union leadership's thinking can reflect those contradictions that we see throughout the system. So changing how people think about whose interests are actually served by a fractured, fragmented, churning faculty workforce, that's such a massive part of the work we need to do. That's what I'm taking away from our really valuable, however short, group.
Thank you, Linda. Thank you, Holly. And it does occur to me that it makes sense if there's a little discussion after each group rather than going through all the groups and then discussing. So if you have, I think maybe we can keep it tight, but like, leaving a little room for that, like that one, that was 3 or 4 or 5 minutes, I think, for that group, but that's fine. I think that's maybe the organic way to do it. So thank you both. The next group on our list would be the Cutbacks group, which I did see ultimately may have joined with another group. But John Holmes, do you want to give us a brief sense of what happened in the Cutbacks group? I know we've done a few Cutbacks breakout rooms over the last couple of weeks. Any new insights, John?
Well, we had a very brief discussion, maybe 4 or 5 minutes, and since it was just me and Orion Teal, we decided to break up the group. Since I did most of the talking, I'd rather not report on it, but Orion, could you possibly say just a couple of words about what we discussed?
Yeah, thanks, John. We briefly chatted about the one-tier system that Peralta, the district that John teaches in, kind of is held out as a model for other California community colleges. So that's something that I know my union has often held up as a model. So it was good to get his backstory about how that came to pass. And I shared a few of the kind of issues with that are happening at my campus too. So it was nice to have that comparison between campuses.
Yeah, just to, one thing I did mention, which I mentioned before, is that the main reason we're able to get part-time wage parity is due to the fact that out of 73 community colleges, the wages for full-time faculty members at Peralta were 72nd out of 73 as the lowest. So in fact, it didn't cost Peralta very much money to give us parity at all. In fact, that's what we always emphasize at board meetings, how cheap it would be for the administration to grant us wage parity, which we got without doing anything about the fight against cutbacks, really. That's it.
Okay, good. Yeah, that actually reminds me of a question I want to ask of group number one. Maybe we can come back to later, but I'm just going to say it aloud before it slips my mind, which is that would be to ask Frank how much the lowest, the previously lowest tier workers at Vancouver Community College, how much they gained when this one faculty model was established, when this one tier model, like what that actually meant in terms of lifting the bottom. You don't need to answer that right now, Frank, but I would love to hear about that if and when you're ready. But our next group up is was the Union Democracy Group. I don't know who to call on. I see Carol's raising a hand. Democratizing our unions, union democracy. Carol, what came out of your discussion? Make sure to unmute yourself.
Well, we had a little debate about who was the main enemy. Was it the bureaucrats or was it the bosses? And, basically, I argued, and I think John and Arnie, I think, also agreed, more or less, that unless you get rid of or move the union bureaucrats out of the way, it will be hard to fight against the cutbacks and the bosses. And Joe was sort of the outstanding voice on the other side and he can chime in after if he wants, saying that we shouldn't focus on the union bureaucrats because the problem is really the bosses and we want to fight the bosses. And, I responded, of course we want to fight the bosses, but in my union, and I know lots of unions, it's almost impossible to fight the bosses because the bureaucrats are just, talk about they're adjuncts to the bosses. They in my union, I was telling this to the group on Thursday. We had a delegate assembly meeting. There are a number of people who want to strike, and we have these signs, and people were saying that we really have to begin to prepare, or at least take a strike authorization vote to let the boss know. And my union president said, on the one hand, I think we're going to get a contract by June. We have not had a contract. Our contract is over, for over a year. I believe he says we're going to have a contract by the summer. And then the next principal officer gets up and says, things are really terrible. They want to get rid of shared, governance. They wanted to put all the power in the hands of the chancellor. And she went on to talk about the dire situation. And so, what is the story? So in both of those circumstances, I said that we have to strike. And, nobody among the principal officers entertained it, or we'd even open it up for discussion. So, in my union, and I think by and large, most of the unions, the conversations are controlled by, they'll entertain it. They'll call on me whenever I raise my hand, but it doesn't go anywhere. They don't say, so what other people think about what she said? Or how could we maybe implement this? And so the argument on my part, and John agreed, and Arnie, I think too, thought that that they were a real obstacle in the way of moving the struggle forward. And I explained that the purpose of organizing a panel on union democracy was not about union democracy for the sake of union democracy, but was to fight the bosses. And Joe, if he wants, he can chime in and pose his argument for it, but
okay.
we were diametrically opposed.
Okay, well, that's not, debate is not unwelcome here, and I do want to just, but insofar as we are getting into the debate, I do want to make clear that nobody here that spoke on our panel today or in these breakout rooms is formally representing. I don't think their membership as a leader. We're speaking as individual union activists and organizers in various organizations in different contexts. So, Joe, do you want to offer your thoughts there? I think you need to unmute.
I unfortunately was called away from the computer and I only heard the last part of what Carol said, but I won't comment on what she said. I'll just say that, my thought on union democracy is that we've got to highlight in all ways possible the fight against the boss. And when the union leadership gets in the way of that, we've got to figure out a way to build a movement to either force them to behave better or replace them. And how to do that is the strategic task. And, reasonable people can disagree about how to do that. But speaking as somebody who spent much of the 70s making the mistake of, in practice, not in theory, but in practice, turning the union leadership, who we opposed and who opposed us in very undemocratic ways, turning them into the main enemy in practice rather than the boss. I got a lot of practice making that mistake, and
Yeah, thank you, Joe. And I think this is an important strategic question to return to, and perhaps warrants its own event in itself. The question of when and how to build strike muscle and the different ways in which local strategic situations kind of set the terms for that. I will just offer one little anecdote, which is that I'm not in a union that's ready to strike, although I talk about it more and more with folks. But I am in a union that used to not let us talk about even the idea of striking. We had leadership, I won't name names, but going back 5-10 years, that because it's illegal to strike in Massachusetts, interpreted that as like, we can't even say the word strike in a union communication. We can't even have it in the minutes of an XCOM meeting because it could be called against us. And we had even a legal counsel from statewide union that tended to was very risk averse and tended to back up our class collaborator of actually I shouldn't say that, but I will say our very, very risk averse leadership. But we changed we organized a caucus for a Democratic union, and we changed the union president, we changed the union leadership, and that didn't make us able to strike, but it did make us able to talk about it. So I do think changes can be made locally through democracy rather than lumping everybody in as kind of, I don't know, as a union bureaucrat. But again, we all have to make that evaluation, I guess, where we are. Sorry if I went on there, but if anybody else has this is a key question. If anybody has anything brief on this that they'd like to say before we move on to the next group, since we are doing discussion as we go. I think I see Audrey and John Holmes with something. Yeah.
Just really briefly. I think Joe Barry's point is really important because my situation is different, but there's a similar problem where faculty are seeing each other as the enemy. And I think my experience is that it has to do with the lack of political experience. So being able to identify what it is we want to fight and not getting caught up in other things. And so I just think it's a really important question that pops up in other contexts. Yeah.
Thank you, Audrey. And John Holmes, did you have a brief something to add on this? You are muted still, John. John, you're still muted.
Yeah, right. I just want to say I was in the group and I found myself in the interesting position of agreeing with everything that Joe had to say and everything that Carol had to say at the same time. But I think the issue is what does it mean when the rubber hits the road? In practice, my experience has been that when you fight for the broader issues, you immediately run up against the union bureaucracy. And this, I just put a note in the chat. I had an experience around what you were talking about, Joe, in my union, with my union president, who talks very left, saying that for a member of the executive committee, such as myself, to even utter the word strike would be an unfair labor practice that would result in us getting union getting sued. So I invariably found euphemisms to get around that, not wanting to wage a fight around this practical point. But this is a perfect example of what Carol was talking about.
Right, and so maybe hopefully you can organize a caucus to change that leadership if you need to. But John Govsky.
Well, yeah, union democracy is complicated. I think I make a difference between seeing who you would think of as the enemy, or I would use the word opponent, and where you want to focus your energy for change. And obviously, I don't see even my non-supportive colleagues as the opponent or the enemy. But at the same time, it's hard to focus elsewhere when your own house needs to be put in order first. So I do think it's important to recognize who our opponent is, but I also think it's important at the same time to focus on certain things internally before you can get to the external fight. If you're really disempowered locally, you really have no choice. But I do think the mindset is important to understand that our I'll use the word colleagues are not necessarily our opponents. They need to be persuaded. They need to be changed. So it's a little complex for me mentally.
Yeah. Thanks, John. And did Holly wanted to get in on this?
Yeah, just briefly. I think that's well put, John. One thing I just wanted to raise is that what are we, I mean, if one were to go on strike, for example, even in an environment where strikes are legal, the issue is what are you striking for, and who are we going to the mat for? And unless contingent issues are in the forefront of that, and it's difficult to what are if our priorities are neglected in the coalition between contingent and non-contingent faculty, we have to, whether it's because of insufficient representation within the decision-making bodies or the elitism that we talked about before, we have to push for equity within our union and within the fights that we're making against management, or our issues will be not properly fought for.
Yeah, Holly, absolutely. It's there's no easy road there, but it's crucial. How do we
No.
get faculty who aren't contingent faculty yet or not fully contingent to center and support centering contingent faculty issues? I think it can be done, but it's no easy lift. I do want to move along to our next group, cognizant of time, although this is a crucial question we need to come back to in various forms. The next group on my list here is group number 4, grasping the link between job security and academic freedom or free speech. Do we have a report out from that group, or was that one that merged? Anyone want to jump in on that? Obviously an important question.
I took some notes, but the other folks in the group can jump in if they want to. We talked about how you can't have academic freedom without job security. And in many cases, academic freedom for part-timers is not protected by the fact that they don't have the same kind of protections that full-time faculty do in these kind of bargainings and things like that. And so, you have to address, without being able to control, sort of know whether or not you're going to have a job. It's kind of, you're not going to be willing to take the risks that you might take in terms of what you talk about and speak about in class. I just said myself that in North Carolina, it just kind of cuts back. So to be talking about who are we organizing against. In North Carolina, it's really hard to tell if the factors that kind of govern both academic freedom and part-time working conditions are driven by financial considerations or whether they're driven by ideological considerations, because we have this right-wing dominated legislature which has appointed a right-wing dominated board of governors. And so a lot of times I know that in the UNCG situation there've been debates over, well, should we target the chancellor? Well, no, we should target the legislature, because if we just target the chancellor, the should send some other flunky down here. But how can we target the legislature if they've gerrymandered everything? And it's really kind of in our case kind of hard to figure out exactly where to start with all these folks in terms of protecting either our academic freedom and our working conditions. But there's definitely a link between the two. So if do any of the members of the group have anything to add to that? I don't know if I was taking notes so fast, I'm not sure if I really got all of the nuances. We'll make sure everything's out there.
Well, I think you raised some really important questions, Dan, and hope you to have them in your notes. And I just want to emphasize again for anybody who, if I didn't do a great job before the breakout rooms of reminding people that we do have a Google Doc, a shared Google Doc, which should be editable by all at the present. I'm going to just put it in the chat box again in case you didn't see it the first time and you do have handwritten notes that you like to transcribe there. Again, our contingency task force that many of you are connected with, but not all of you, meets regularly, weekly or biweekly on Saturdays. And we will be going through the feedback here and trying to sift and synthesize and tease out the key themes and ideas for future events, and also for proposals and language we can bring back to the larger HELU group. So if you're not involved yet in the contingency task force, but would like to be, please do email me as the chair, and you can also find Higher Ed Labor United online and join the organization yourself or organizationally directly. I'll put that link in the chat next time I stop talking. Speaking of which, Group 5, taking part-time or adjunct faculty issues seriously. This was in some ways a group paralleled with group number 7, overcoming divide and rule on our campuses. I mean, this is kind of embodies the dialectic between taking the contingent faculty issues very seriously, but also trying to overcome unnecessary divisions, harmful divisions in our own ranks. So maybe, I don't know if we're going to hear from Group 5 or Group 7 or both, but could one of those two groups please step forward? I see Mike Budd's hand. Yeah.
Yes, we had a small group, but we had a good discussion in Group 5, and we were focusing, or trying to focus on the issue of part-time versus full-time faculty and the way we look at these things so differently. David Milroy from California, and then also let's see, Jacob Trago from California also, and I'm from Florida. So we began to try to think about what are the similarities and differences across geographical areas, union versus anti-union areas, different institutions. What are the because in HELU we're trying to learn from each other, we're trying to teach each other, right? And Florida is in so many ways different from California, but what can we learn from each other? So we began, specifically about this issue, and we began with the enormous specificities of the California system at all levels versus the Florida system, which is partly modeled after that. So I think we just really got into, I now have a greater appreciation about the complexities of these situations, of this issue across different institutional situations. And just to the people in the last who gave the last report were already where I think we were going in our group, and I'm happy to let the other two folks in our group mention this, but they yeah, I mean, John Goffsey said union democracy is complicated. the people in the other group had an argument or a discussion about, who's our opponent? Is it the union bureaucracy? Is it the full-time faculty? Is it the who is it? Or is it the the people who actually make the decisions? For me, it will always be our class enemies, or the people who choose to be our class enemies, and that's the trustees, the oligarchs, all of those folks. So I think for me, my experience is that, and my experience is largely, not entirely, as a full-time faculty member. And I think we have to treat full-time faculty members, as John Gofsky said, we have to treat full-time faculty members, no matter, as potential allies. Okay, they are persuadable, right? The trustees, the presidents, all of those people, they're not persuadable. Okay, so those folks are our opponents. But to me, when I think about this functionally, I think that the union bureaucracy, and I don't like that term bureaucrats, because I think we're leaders, whether we're elected or staff or whoever. But the union bureaucracy and the full-time faculty in this situation, looked at from 10,000 feet, are serving similar functions. They are risk averse. So we have to understand why union bureaucrats are, and sometimes that includes ourselves, are risk averse. And we have to understand why full-time faculty are sometimes risk averse, because they have more to lose than the part-time faculty, right? Anybody who makes a political decision is thinking about risks to themselves. And we have to think of, help people to be less self-centered, less neoliberal, and more focused on collective, the collective good, the public good. Over.
Thank you, Mike. Really, I thought well said. Linda Sneed, your hand is up. Is it respond to that, or is that
quick? Yeah, I just wanted to say how much I appreciate what Mike just said, and I feel really strongly that we undertake a sort of separatist politics at our peril.
That's sharply put. Thank you, Linda Sneed. Moving on, we have group 6. I didn't mean to lump 5 and 7 together. I wasn't sure which groups held and which ones split and merged. Group number 6 is actually the challenges and opportunities of building to strike. And I think I was in that group, but I think it's Diana and Anne who are going to actually talk to y'all.
Yeah, thank you. Look, I hope we helped to show that even in the most difficult strike, with a private sector determined to break our union, we were made up of all contingent faculty, and we were able to sustain that. I think the power has to be in, being able to demonstrate the willingness, ability to stand up for, let's face it, sometimes it's just basic safety nets like health insurance. But with Anne, she's going, their locals going into a strike that starts tomorrow, and we just ended our strike. And, we talked a lot about, what's going to help to make it successful. And, I don't think there's one exact formula. Certainly, building relationships, organizing, making sure you have a plan. But for us, one of the strengths, and I shared with Anne, was utilizing our strength as an institution where, we were able to do a lot of press, a lot of professional images, videos, and we were able to build that kind of solidarity with others to be able to sustain that. It wasn't perfect. I shared that, our tenure faculty at one point not only crossed the picket line, but started to take our classes. And, that cultural shift that I think we're all talking about has to happen. But it already, the fact is the majority of the faculty across this country are non-tenure track. And I think we have to understand that we we need to all work together to, if we really care about saving higher ed, which I know we do, we just all need to work together. So with Anne, it was about, hopefully, we all are here to help you, Anne, and help any institution that's going to stand up and take that brave move to go on strike. It's not easy. It's always easier to go on strike. It's harder to get back in, right? So Anne, I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about anything else.
Sure, thanks. I work for SEIU in Boston, and we are taking 3,000 graduate students at Boston University out on strike tomorrow. And it's been yes, it's absolutely exciting. It's enormous. We are in the throes of planning and we are all exhausted. But I imagine on Monday when we get to the picket line, we'll be energized and exhausted at the same time. But I'm in the process of trying to figure out how to best help make it be a successful experience. And so any advice or thoughts that anyone in Hilo has about, how to get 3,000 people organized and walking in a circle every day until they get some portion of what they want. And also how to, the thing about them is they're incredibly idealistic and activated and militant and utterly unwilling to compromise. So at some point, that's going to have to change. And any advice you have about that would also be helpful. Anyone who can show up and is in Boston, come out at noon on Monday. It should be fun.
So I was in that group, but I also live in Boston, and Anne, I will be there. I understand my speaking spot got bumped by a certain congressional figure who's going to be addressing the rally there, which is great. But I will get out there and do what I can. I also wanted to say, if you're talking about long picket lines, I think having a creative chant sheet is important, varying the chants. And actually, I'm going to spotlight a couple things that didn't get mentioned that came out of our group that I think might be action items for the future. Diana shared, has reminded us that their strike at Columbia College of Chicago was an arts faculty. And it seems that even after their strike, they're running high on the fumes of the solidarity there and are really interested in helping struggles elsewhere. And it occurred to me that Hilo could develop a kind of arts committee wing, that really brings together union motivated actual professional artists. I mean, we all do the best we can with our homemade signs, but some of us actually have this skill set. And I just want to kind of say that out loud and put it in the notes as something we might actually develop. The other thing I would say for Anne, and we've corresponded privately about this, but as a contingent faculty organizer, I think it's very, very crucial that grad students organizing now are organizing in light of the fact that they're not going to get those tenure track jobs, even at a place like BU. I mean, a few will, but most won't. And it seems to me the more grad students are aware that their future is as a contingent faculty member of one sort or another, a lucky full-timer or a part-timer, that really puts the urgency of not accepting wages you can't live on at any point in your educational career, right? You can't afford to live on 12, 18, even in Boston, $20,000 a year, thinking, oh, well, you'll make it up on the back end, but take six-figure debt in the meantime. So I just think that's my one whatever motivation. I actually wrote a piece on this called "No More Scabbing on Our Future Selves," looking back at my own graduate organizing. And I think, smashing that illusion of the tenure track job that's going to save you individually seems to be easier said than done, right? But really a crucial thing to motivating struggles in the present. We can't. So anyway, I'll be out there with you when I can, Anne. And I hope other Boston folks will join. All right. Moving along. I see Jacob has a hand on. Jacob, do you have something you share on this topic?
Yeah, just very quickly, when it comes to organizing students who are unapologetically determined and not willing to compromise, I have a fair bit of experience. And the one thing that I will say really sets you up strong is to have your public goal and your private goal, where you hype up your crowd early on and you say, what we want to get today is this very small thing that they actually have the power to give us. What we want to get a year from now is this larger thing that we are entitled to and should have. And that way, when a compromise comes down the road, it is your private goal. It is the thing that they were there for today, the thing that they were passionate for today, their secret goal, and they will continue the work for the thing that we want a year from now. But having that private goal as well as your public goal means that when compromise is offered, as long as it looks even remotely similar to the thing that you said you might be willing to settle for, your students will be excited that they actually got something done. And then a year from now, you can ask them to come back for your larger public goal.
Thank you, Jacob. Good advice. And we're going to move on to cognizant of time. We are people's, their time. We're a little over time here. So we're going to go to group 7, overcoming divide and rule on our campuses. And then we'll go to the legislative group. Group 7, any thoughts? I do believe this might have
I
been
was tasked with responding for this group. So
thank you, Orion.
I'll just go briefly mention the things that we talked about. We had a interesting discussion about different ways on our campuses that part-timers and full-timers have been divided, some of the issues that have pitted them against each other. And then we had group members from California mainly, but we also had a group member from North Carolina. So comparing experiences in different states, across regions, across local campuses within California was really interesting. There's a really good point towards the end about there being maybe more than 2 tiers also in community colleges, and thinking about non-instructional faculty and sometimes the way that they can be pitted against part-time instructional faculty, and also our non-credit instructors too, especially get really the short end of the stick in their treatment. So thinking about how we can, in thinking about moving towards 1 tier, bring along some of those folks who might also be left out of that equation.
Thank you very much, Orion. Last but not least, group 8, prospects and pitfalls of recent and current legislative efforts. I believe we had Scott and Kalina in this group.
I couldn't get Kalina to report back, so I guess I'll do it. But anyway, we talked about a number of issues in law and in legislation. I think highlighted by the reality that they're often very difficult to parse and understand. Let me give one example, and just to give an idea. Most people think that if you're an exempt, classified as an exempt employee, maybe that's a good thing, because why? Well, exempt employees, typically professional people on a salary, paid very well. Why is that so? Well, it's because under federal law and in most state laws, certainly true here in California, to be exempt, you have to be paid well. That's required, or you can't be exempt. What are you exempt from? You're exempt from rank and file protections, meal breaks, no overtime pay, et cetera, et cetera. So pay well, but you don't get some of these protections. Okay, maybe that's good. Now let's look at the federal law. The federal law exempts teachers. They're exempt. So they get none of those standard protections, but it specifically says exempt regardless of how much they're paid. So you can make very, very little as a teacher and still be exempt from protections of other aspects of the law. Now go to California. You would think that you're protected if you're in California by the California Labor Code, which is pretty progressive. But in California, the vast majority of the Labor Code does not apply to public employees. So what does that mean? You're exempt under federal law, even if you don't make very much money, and the laws that might protect you in California don't apply because if you're in a community college, you're a public employee. It's a tangled mess, and it's not well understood, and that's just one example.
Thanks, Scott. Kalina, you anything to add to that from, I don't know if Kalina's...
I'm here, but I think he summed it up well. Thanks.
Okay, great. All right, y'all. I think 4:51 Eastern Standard Time. We're almost at 3 hours, although we did start about 10 minutes late. So we're only about 10 minutes over from our time. But I want to thank you all. We still have 30 folks here on this Zoom after close to 3 hours of discussion and breakout rooms. And I think it's been really rich. And we have recorded this, and we are recording it in the chat via the chat box, as well as in the Google Doc, which I will just share one more time for anybody who wants to add notes that you may have missed. I will be, and others will be going through this as we meet. If you're interested in joining the contingency task force, if you're interested in joining HELU, we have put those links in the chat. You can reach out to me directly, and you can reach out via the HELU website. We are particularly interested in having you join as whether as an at-large individual member or particularly as a representative of a local union or another higher ed labor organization, because we have our first in-person refounding convention, May 17th to May 19th. Going to be held at the New Brunswick campus of Rutgers in New Jersey. We hope many of you can be there in person. There will be remote options, and this is a chance to shape the future of HELU, as well as the leadership, the line, the ongoing platform. And we really want to make sure contingency issues continue to be centered, and community colleges in particular, within this broader coast to coast and wall to wall mission that we have here at HELU. So if this is the first you're hearing about HELU, please reach out. If you're already looped in, this is a great chance to reactivate and recommit as we make this movement even more real than it was a couple years ago when we started this thing. I want to thank you all for being here tonight. And let's keep up the conversation, y'all. Solidarity to y'all, and especially to the BU workers, grad workers going out on strike on Monday.